Hello and welcome to the village of Cuckney near Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. Actually, we could have been at either Cuckney or nearby Norton because we've been invited by the Norton, Cuckney and District Village Produce Association, a joint venture which started as a gardens association in 1942. It's a busy organisation with 2 shows a year, lots of country walks and visits to gardens of interest in the summer and talks, quizzes and film shows during the winter. Membership is registered in families, and at the moment there's 80 of them on the rolls, which sounds pretty good. Both villages lie on the A60 between Mansfield and Worksop, the edge of the Dukeries. And Welbeck Abbey lies about 3 miles down the road from here. Soil, well, it varies from heavy clay to light sand within a 5-mile radius, so that's not going to help our team a great deal, I'm afraid. And the team it isn't going to help is made up of Fred Loads, Bill Sowerbutts and Professor Alan Gemmell. Right, we've got our first questioners. Could we have your name and then your question, please?
Hello, my name is Dorothy Morris, and my question is about overhanging trees on other people's property and what the correct procedure is in this case.
Right, Mrs. Morris, we're talking about neighbourliness a little bit, aren't we?
Yes, we are. I wouldn't like to offend anyone because, of course, we all have these overhanging trees.
OK, well, I'm going to ask Professor Gemmell to have a go at this for a start. What's the correct procedure about removing offending branches, Alan, if trees overhang other people's properties and whatnot?
Let me not start with the correct procedure. Let me start with what I think is the wise procedure, and that is to talk to the neighbours about it. This is the wise procedure, first of all, and if some amicable solution can be reached, well and good. The actual right procedure is that any tree of a neighbour's, any branch of a neighbour's tree which overhangs your property, you're entitled to have removed, simply because it's encroaching on your area. On the other hand, if there is fruit on it, the fruit still belongs to the owner of the tree, and if they want the branch that you cut off back, it still belongs to them. But you can remove encroaching plant material.
There's another thing additionally too about branch trespass. There is root trespass as well, and the same thing applies there, doesn't it, Alan? Root or branch trespass. You can cut them off, but they don't belong to you.
The thing to do is to try to solve it as neighbours and not as litigants in a court.
Yeah, I think this is true. If you took legal advice, I'm sure that's the first thing they would say is try and work it out among yourselves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Morris. Please, yes, madam.
Mrs. Hilda Presley. I have a red hawthorn tree, 3 years old. It doesn't look very healthy, and the flowers shrivel almost as soon as they form. What is the reason, please?
Right, Mrs. Presley, you've no relatives called Elvis or anything like that, no?
I wish I had.
Rich relatives, yes. You've a red hawthorn tree, you say, and it isn't doing so well. It looks rather poorly, and the flowers shrivel when they're young, you say?
Well, they just begin to show red.
Yeah, and then
and you think you're going to have
go.
a lovely show, and before they come out properly, they shrivel up. Have a cherry tree that is the same.
What might it be, Bill? This is 3 years old, this particular one.
Well, I think a 3-year-old thorn, is it a standard tree?
Yes.
A clean ball of about 4 feet, I guess.
Yes.
Something like that, and then a head.
Yes.
It would probably be Paul Scarlet. This is the one usually. Well, is it staked?
Yes.
It is staked firmly.
Yes.
This is important. Well, in my experience, this scarlet thorn, I'm surprised, really, it's produced some flower and bud, even if they've aborted. I think you've no need to worry at all. It will make its own way, and in a few years' time, and I think it could well be half a dozen plus, and it will flower and flower and flower, and you won't have any bother at all. I think it's only a matter of time. It's a very, very young tree. Is the cherry the same, only recently planted?
No, that's about 8 years old.
Yeah, well, that may be there may be another cause there. There may be a mite in the flower bud. You see, in the cherries, the bud is produced in the autumn, and I think you could, with advantage, spray in January, say, and certainly not at this date, and spray with a DNO wash. That's on the cherry.
Yes.
I think the thorn, oh dear, 5-10 years, I would say, and it will flower readily, and you can't stop it.
Practical experience. I had a Paul Scarlet hawthorn which took exactly 8 years before it set any flowers in any number at all. The bud showed pink, and then it sort of withered back and dropped. That's the same thing. Yes, I agree. I think about 8 years.
Just a matter of time.
It could be initially bird damage. Later on, as they get bigger,
Got plenty of birds.
Yeah, well, it could well be bullfinches. Later on, as Bill says, they make a lot, so there'll probably be more buds. than there are bullfinches. So you're bound to get some.
Right, thank you very much.
Mrs. Presley. Yes, sir, please, what's your problem?
George Shadbolt. For most people, there's a certain time of the year which holds nostalgic memories, such as those conjured up by the mention of crocus and snowdrops. Would the team give their own reflections on this theme?
Bill, would you like to start us off with a few printable thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be aconite or snowdrop time or even the early varieties of crocus time. It would be a bit too cold, that, for me to really get nostalgic about. It would be later on in the year, I think, when the birds are really singing, and most of all, I think, when the tailed bird, I've forgotten the name of it.
Swallow?
Swallow?
The swallow. Not the swift, the swallow.
I nearly said peacock, but I knew that would be wrong.
Yeah, that would be wrong, yeah. And not the ptarmigan.
When the peacocks return to Ashton-under-Lyne, that's a story about.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a song in there somewhere.
Yeah, the swallows, when they come back from North Africa, wherever they've been to, and I see them pop into my garage and apparently go back to where they were born 12 months before. I think this is an absolute miracle, and I delight to see them. And by that time, of course, there's plenty of flies about, and they're on the wing and they're feeding. And I think this is an absolute wonderful, marvellous miracle of nature. I know birds do some birds do a lot of damage in the garden, but I like birds. They do a lot of good anyway.
I've written 2 words down here whilst Bill has been talking, and one is Easter and the other is primroses. Now, I always associate those two. Primroses is still my favourite flower, in spite of all the exotic and all the marvellous flowers that I have grown during my gardening life. I still think the common or garden primrose is one of the most beautiful, most rewarding, scent, brave. All this vile weather that we've had, it's tried to poke its little flowers up against all the snow and the frost. And I go back to boyhood days when primroses were on every bank in Norfolk where I grew up. You could go any field bank and get, as we did, basketfuls, clothes baskets. We used to get mother's clothes basket, great big wicker basket, bunch up, few leaves round, cart them off to the church where they used to put all these on the side windows, masses and masses of primrose. And we used to bring in moss and shove these in. So for me, it's Easter and primroses.
They'll put you in jail for that now, Fred.
No, they wouldn't, because with the farmers using weed killers and all sorts of things, there's no primroses on the banks.
Everything that's been said so far has betokened spring. And this clearly is nostalgia, Freud would say, for the days of your youth. And notice it's rather I'm not including you, it's rather elderly men talking. I think if I were asked to say the things which I remember, as a feeling within me, which is really what nostalgia is all about, one of them is in fact winter. When I go up to Scotland, you get all the shades of brown. The brown of the heather, the brown of the bracken dying, the brown of the sheep's fescue grass on the hills, the snow on the very tops. I think this is a marvellous time. And the other thing which I like very much, which is terribly evocative, is in my garden in Cheshire, the sun sets behind a row of copper beeches and Scots pines, which I have in the paddock, and these black trees against the red sunset. It can turn me into tears. It's beautiful, I think. And everyone has all sorts of nostalgic memories like this, but it's interesting that my 2 colleagues are not accepting that time is passing, whereas I think I am.
I don't quite agree with that, because in my part of the country, swallows don't come back till about May 22nd, which is not spring, is it?
At your age, you'd call it spring, wouldn't you?
No, May 22nd is approach of midsummer.
To leave again on May 25th.
I'm surprised that they're rather as late as that, Fred, but around here it's something, April.
Oh, no, well, ours are much later.
Yeah.
Man, they've got to go further.
Yes, and they're very reluctant to go. They put it off as long as they possibly can.
Can I turn the tables on you and ask you what springs in your breast when you talk about nostalgia?
Well, I'm batting number 4, and all these things, each one to me has been a sort of thing that I look for. To me, I think each season has its own benefits and delights and desires.
Yeah, I think I agree mainly with Bill and Fred. Spring's lovely. I mean, what's nicer than the first touch of colour in the willows, the birches this time? It's beautiful. The fact that you've lived through another winter is marvellous, isn't it? Right, Mr. Shadbolt, thank you for that question. I have a lady here. Oh, it's the one we've been autographing a plaster cast this afternoon.
Doris
Please.
Millard. I injured my back last year.
As well.
And was
No.
unable to dig my garden. Now it's very light soil. So when I came to set it, I just push-hoed it and set the seeds. Now, having had the best crop ever, is it necessary to do so much digging each year?
Right, Mrs. Millard. It's the old controversy, Fred, to dig or not to dig.
Well, I think on very light soil you can get away with a lot of things that you can't on more difficult soils. And you see, apparently, I'm only guessing now, this soil has been well looked after and well cultivated in the past.
I've always dug it well before.
And
Well, forked it really.
Yes,
but,
and incorporated.
And well manured.
And incorporated manure in.
Fertiliser. I don't use manure, I use fertiliser.
Well, do you put compost or any organic
Yes,
stuff on? Yes,
compost.
well, for all practical purposes, good compost is almost as good as manure. So you really have considerable reserves, and you could, in a year where you get plenty of moisture, go on for several years without doing anything more than you have done. You see, because this soil won't compact in the same way as a clay soil. A clay or a silty soil, if you didn't let air into it, would become so compacted and get so soggy that roots wouldn't get through it. You can get away with it probably for another 3 or 4 years, and then either you or somebody else would have to put something in it. But you can help enormously by just using a mulch, and the worms will take it down. My brother had a soil similar to this in Norfolk, and in somewhere around about 40 years, he never dug it in the sense that I have to dig my soil. Just incorporate organic matter occasionally and rely on mulches and ordinary fertilizer.
I think the answer to your question lies in the fact that you said you had forked it. This means it must have been a relatively light soil and not a very heavy soil.
You can't really dig it unless it's rained. It is just like dust.
Well, in that case, you don't ever need to dig it again. I would just top dress it, and when you're armed better, hoe it.
Oh, wait.
And that's really all you need to do. Top dress it with compost of some kind. Fred's right, the worms will take it down. But you don't need to dig a very light soil at all. You're wasting your time.
Are you left-handed?
Not at all. Well, I'm learning to be, but I couldn't dig with my left hand.
No, because the point should be made that this lady's broken her right arm. It
Yeah.
slipped on the ice
Yes.
in January, February, something like this. Yeah, so this year you're going to have to fork or dig or hoe with your left hand, which is going to be quite a problem, isn't it?
It is.
Well, I should forget all about it this year, I agree, but next year go back to your forking. I think when you recover it, don't slip on the ice next year.
Thank you.
I was going to say, take care. Please, madam.
Mary Stokes, which are the best types of onion for the climatic conditions in this area? And are there varieties resistant to the onion white rot disease?
Right, Miss Stokes, you want to know about the best types of onions for the conditions in this area and, if possible, varieties that are resistant to onion white rot disease. And Fred Loads knows his onions, I think. Fred, please.
Well, can I start at the end? Actually, I live in an area where they grow the biggest onions in the world, 5.5 pounds. And
That's all.
the chappie that started that has been doing it 50-odd years. And so they can be grown massive onions. As for white rot, I don't know of any variety that's resistant to it, but I do know a trick, and I've never had white rot in my life. I don't mean me onions. I might get white rot any time, but...
Pink rot, I think, Fred.
You'll get hard bad.
Make up a mixture of equal parts hydrated lime and flowers of sulphur. Now, when you're preparing the onion bed, before you plant out your onions or your onion set, scatter this over at the rate of about an ounce, not critical, ounce and a half to the square yard, and lightly rake it in. Leave it on the surface, but lightly rake it in, and then put on your onions. And I always find that an absolute safeguard against getting white rot. Certainly change the bed if you have had white rot in that area. But otherwise, if there's no disease, use the same bit of land every time. Now, there's a new variety just come out, and I've seen the certificates of quality and all the rest of it. I admit it comes from America, but it's guaranteed to last 2 Christmases. And it's called Spartan Sleeper. In other words, after the onion is harvested and ripe, it goes to sleep, and it doesn't wake up until it's put in the pan.
And are these onion sets or are they seeds?
Onion sets.
They're onion sets.
Onion sets. In fact, it's not a round onion, the Spartan Sleeper, Fred. It's a kind of torpedo-shaped onion. It's a longer one.
Yeah.
And there are 1 or 2 of this type now in the market. And the new Japanese onions have a high resistance against white rot. You have to plant them in the autumn, and you have them ready in June, July. They are early onions, which you can get when there is nothing else in the market. The Japanese varieties, whose names I honestly can't remember.
I did put some in about 2 years ago and they're still coming up.
Yes, I know. They
I don't know where they've gone to.
I think you find sown onions, as opposed to onion sets, or plants planted out, will have less trouble with smut and mildew than sets. You know, actually sown very, very thinly. On the cloches, maybe end of March, early April, very, very thinly in lines. And to me, there's nothing better than the old slightly pink variety of Bedfordshire Champion. I know these modern varieties, but these boys are always trying to make something out new that's a little worse, in my opinion. And I don't go for them at all.
Yes, I don't think the flavour's there that there is in Bedfordshire Champion. On the other hand, some of them are very resistant to white rot, which Bedfordshire Champion isn't.
Yes, and it's certainly not a show onion, I agree. It's a table onion.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, please.
Dennis Snowden. Can good compost be made without adding expensive accelerators? And if so, which are the best ingredients to use to get quick results?
Right, Mr. Snowden. Can good compost be made without expensive accelerators, Alan? And some suggestions for the best ingredients to get... He wants quick results.
This is the point of accelerators, of course. Good compost has been made for hundreds of years without any accelerators, so in fact, accelerators are not necessary. They just do what they say they do. They accelerate the process. And normally, you're paying quite a lot of money for something which contains a readily available source of nitrogen. If you can get that, you don't need any other accelerator. A readily available source of nitrogen, sulfate of ammonia, cyanamide, ammonium nitrate, if you can get it, any of these, a quickly available nitrogen. I think dried blood's a very good one. Quickly available nitrogen, that's all you need as an accelerator, and that will do perfectly well.
The dried blood is very, very expensive.
Dried blood's expensive, yes.
I don't think you need to buy anything whatsoever. If you'll just take your spade, say, and take a top half-inch of your vegetable soil from your vegetable garden, which will be, or should be, of high fertility, and put that on alternate layers of your compost or straw, every 6-inch trample layer, you're introducing all the bacteria, earthworms there, and you'll get a breakdown very, very quickly without spending anything, only a bit of, a bit of labour. I think, at one time, I remember years ago, there were people supposedly selling you bacteria in a little packet, like an envelope, An absolute take-in. They should have gone to jail.
Well, I'm a very basic sort of gardener, and I haven't found anything better than the old-fashioned slop bucket.
Can't take him anywhere,
It can become very embarrassing at times.
He's going to go on about the country seat now. Alan, would you like to?
The old country houses.
Quite.
Undoubtedly, this is just a quickly available source of nitrogen, probably urea. All right.
Right, Mr. Snowden, thank you very much. Oh, we do get onto some subjects, don't we? We've time for one more question, I think, so if we could have somebody up. Yes, sir, please.
Frank Francis. When I grow parsnips, by July they look very healthy, with tops of about 2 foot 6. But then they flop to the ground and rot off, leaving the root rotten. Could you please tell me what may be causing this?
What on earth's happening, Bill?
Well, it might be a disease. There is a disease that causes parsnips to rot off, but I would think more likely it's a secondary organism following a carrot fly attack, an attack by the maggot. I would think this is it. So I think you should this year take precautions of BHC powder or carbaryl sprinkled down the rows of parsnips. Once or twice during the season, that's all we need to stop the fly laying any eggs, and I think you would not have any trouble.
I don't think it's appreciated enough that carrot fly and the organism that causes cracks in the shoulders of canker, of parsnips, into which canker can get, are the same thing. And Bill says BHC, carbaryl, actually almost any good insecticide will do, and there are some ones specifically directed against carrot root fly, and you would find they would control the parsnip one.
The alternative is to grow a variety which is resistant, called Avon resistor, and sow late.
This is about the right time
Yeah,
for the average sown one, is it, July, Bill?
That's resistant to canker, not resistant to fly. Not even resistant.
I know, but it's resistant to the canker.
Yes,
The fly only makes marks on it. But if it's susceptible to canker, they will get into the wounds.
It's not as good a quality variety. I don't like parsnips very much. In fact, I've only liked them once in my life, and that's when Bill's wife made parsnip soup, and it was absolutely delicious. But I'm told by those who like them, the Avon resistor, you can save it from canker. It's not very worth eating.
No, I think for flavour, I don't think you can beat the old variety student.
Yes, but sow later. You see, they tell you, the gardening books say that you can sow it in January or February. But if you leave it until the end of March, you get smaller, better roots, more easily harvestable, and they get away fast and without any check.
Not much joy for you, Mr. Francis, there.
I remember telling a person once that he should successionally sow parsnips. This was years ago, when I had just started in this game. And the poor man successionally sowed parsnips. He had a garden full of the most beautiful, great parsnips. Didn't know what to do with them at the end.
Well, what did he do? He could make good parsnip wine.
Yeah, I know, yes, but... Yeah.
And then he'd be ill all winter.
One of the nicest vegetables grown.
It is, yes. I don't know what Alan's thinking about, saying that the parsnips aren't nice. Anyway,
Hard-boiled and baked or dropped into the chip pan, you can't beat.
we're all different. It's just as well, isn't it?
Just as well, yes. They don't like Swedes, and I think they're marvellous.
All right, Mr. Francis. Thank you very much. Right, that's it for questions then. Now we come to topical tips, and I just wondered to myself whether anybody's going to believe topical tips on the 1st of April, but we'll try, shall we? Fred, what are you going to tell us?
Well, this is a good thing to do any year, but more particularly this year after such a winter, and that is to give all fruit trees a good handful of nitrate of soda. Depending on the size of the tree, roughly about a closed handful to the square yard over the root run. Now for stone fruits, plums, cherries, and even flowering cherries and plums, use ground limestone.
Thank you, Fred. Alan?
As we move up towards Easter, more and more people will be beginning to think I must get my potatoes in by Easter because this is the traditional time. And I'm just wanting to give you the tip that, once again, it's been fairly conclusively shown that the best yield of the crop is eventually got from a tuber which bears 3 sprouts. Not, if they've more than 3, take them off. And also when you're doing it, just take a little look at the sprouts to see if there are any green fly on them, and if there are, give it a dust with Derris.
All right, thank you, Alan. Bill?
Well, depending on district, peaches and nectarines will be in flower, and outdoors you may not need to bother about pollination of the flowers. If there's enough bees working, everything will be okay. But if you have them under glass, then you'll have to do some artificial pollination with a little brush or a rabbit's tail or whatever, unless you leave the vents open and insects can get in. But I think under glass you must pollinate peach and nectarine flowers outdoors. Then your worry is then probably you'll get fertilization, but you might get frost damage. So I think it's wise to drape the bushes in difficult districts with, say, 1-inch string mesh to break the frost.
And that's all for today, I'm afraid. We've been in Nottinghamshire with the Norton and Cuckney Village Produce Association. Next week we'll be in Wales as guests of the Aberdyfi Garden Club. So until then, it's goodbye for now from Fred Loads, Bill Sowerbutts, Professor Alan Gemmell, and of course from me, Ken Ford. Good day to you.